Welcome to the voice of Bold Business Radio, the show about ways to stay competitive in a changing market, break through business plateaus, and respond to the changing expectations of today's customers. Your host, Jess Dewell, is a rapid growth entrepreneur, consultant, and business advocate with a 20-year track record of business excellence. She candidly discusses how to achieve your growth strategy and realize your company's unfulfilled potential. Now, here's Jess.
Happy Tuesday, and this is the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Today, our program 237, is titled Productivity of Multi-Generational Teams. And we're talking about all kinds of things today. And I'm not quite sure where this conversation is going to go because we only have 50 minutes. And while I tried, and you all know who are listening, I work really hard to come up with some sort of a package. This one, we might open this package, and we don't know what's coming out. Because
we'll be up for it.
Yes, we are totally up for it, Phyllis. And with us, right? So whether you're facing changes in technology, whether you're anticipating changes that your customers you're starting to notice those trends and changes, whether you're recognizing the competitive marketplace is changing for your industry in your space right now, well, guess what? You're in the right place. You're in the right place, and you're probably like, what does multi-generational teams and productivity have to do with those things? Well, you're going to find out, because it's through leveraging what we already know, what we might know, what we're willing to know, and how we can work together, not only personality-wise, but with the experience that each of us brings to the table. That's where our growth potential is. And I'm excited to introduce to you Phyllis Haserot. She is the president and founder of Practice Development Counsel. She is the foremost workplace multi-generational expert. She speaks with a cross-generational voice. She is a uniter, and she harnesses and brings the power of cross-generational conversation and collaboration to solve urgent business problems that you face. The thing is, whether we're retaining clients, whether we're retaining employees, whether we're attracting employees and clients, when we use different generations, when we build multi-generational teams, not only do we have knowledge transfer, not only do we have succession planning, we have active, engaged problem solving. So Phyllis works with organizational leadership and multi-generational teams, both internally and externally, to build those stakeholder relationships. I'm really glad you're here today, Phyllis.
Well, so am I. Thank you so much, Jess.
And we were talking before the show, and I was like, we were in the middle of this, and Scott goes, "Okay, quiet on the set," and I was not ready.
Well, we won't talk about dogs and cats.
I know. We had just moved on to the meat of things, hadn't we? And I know you have coined a phrase, GENgagement. And I want to start there and set the stage and maybe the outline of our box of this importance of GENgagement, what it is, and let it be the theme with which we're talking today.
Okay. Well, as you know, and people who follow me, I am all about cross-generational conversation at work. So I think, and as I say, I'm a uniter. I have recognized the importance of this. It's always been actually second nature to me, but difficult for a lot of people, and I realized that through the various parts of my career. But I think it's all about, the business case, because we're talking about it at work, for why we're doing this. Now, GENgagement, and I think I probably made up a formal definition of it. That's in my book. You can't Google it. Compelling case for cross-generational conversation at work. But it means working harmoniously with people of all ages and generations and other aspects of diversity too. And you can't do that if you're not interested in understanding how they got to be thinking and behaving the way they do. We don't really define generations by what year you were born. I mean, sometimes that's just way off base because people are different based on the influences that they've had growing up, not when they were toddlers mostly, but, like by high school, college age, and what was going on in the world and economically, socially, politically, culturally that they relate to, that resonate with them. So that's a very important thing. And how people were parented, sometimes people find this very interesting, but there were particular parent experts, that were known generation by generation. So with the boomers, it was a lot of self-esteem, and you had Barry Basilton, who influenced a lot the Generation X's parents, the different kinds of things, and how the millennials, for instance, who I don't think I don't call anybody entitled, but they have so much from their parents, their coaches, their teachers, their other relatives, all behind them, helping them, and doing everything in groups. And so it was, that has a big influence where the Xers did not have that. They had more mothers going to work than ever before, for instance, and more divorce that were, that was going on. And it's not like none of these happened before, but it happened more at particular times. And that definitely influenced how people come to the workplace. How, whether they jump in, whether they are prepared to know how to act when they get.
Yes. We were just having a conversation the other day. And there are so many things that we think about, and the skills that we are learning at home or the skills that we are not learning at home that help us out in the world. And I know whether it's formal schooling or a life experience, I know depending on your age, you might say, oh yeah, my education is in the school of hard knocks, right? By the way, I have a lot of that too. And the point being, though, is that when we have that experience, when we are looking to see that, the willingness to recognize somebody else walked a totally different path than us and has totally different views, yet our intention could be the same, is a fascinating concept. And
that's right.
Keep going.
There are a lot of, we're wanting, GENgagement is about working toward common goals so people can be more productive for their organizations, happier in the way that they are working, actually achieving outcomes much faster, being more profitable, all of those kinds of things. So
and it sounds like it starts with openness. This concept of
absolutely.
I'm going to show up and be open. I know what I know, and I know I don't know everything. And I know I'm here to interact with you right now for a purpose.
And that's one of the greatest motivations I had for writing You Can't Google It, but which is about 10 essential skills and traits that I think you cannot learn, acquire, or practice by going out on the internet. And relating to what you just said, one of them is perspective. And it is very hard to understand somebody's or learn somebody's perspective if you have not been the environment that you grew up with and operate in was not similar. And we aren't talking about it as much at home. People are busy. So even parents don't share that, or grandparents with with their kids as much. And there's so much in the school curriculums that they don't get to those things. It's really stuffing people's heads with data. Not that that isn't important. It's just there isn't enough time and bandwidth for all of these kinds of things. So the way people were more sensitive to these things and more open was, it seemed it was there in the air more than it is now. But the other thing, and I don't think we can ignore this, is that in the last few years, things that were beneath the surface in terms of divisiveness have just exploded, and people are afraid to reach out to each other and only want to talk to people that they feel comfortable with because they think they share the same values or the same experiences or other aspects of diversity, whether it's age, race, gender, disabilities, and even, diversity of thought. So this is something that I find just very disturbing. And this morning I read about some research that's come out about how bad trust has gotten among it came out from politics and spilled out to everything. And for the younger people, more so than even the older ones, but there's a lot of mistrust and they're not talking to each other.
Does the erosion of trust come from the fact that we are talking to each other less within our families, within our home unit, within our closest friends, or our personal strength, the network that we call on to live and hopefully get past survival so that we can go out into the world and actually thrive and be part of a bigger solution at the work that we do, the place that we go every day?
Sure. That's got to be a lot of it. It's certainly not everything, but we shouldn't want to be, at work surrounded by yes persons, only people who are going to agree with you, because then you won't get other perspectives. You can't innovate that way, even if it's a little uncomfortable and things are unfamiliar and people are unfamiliar. It's also, I think, very exciting to be with different people.
It is. And you never know what you're going to learn, and you never know what will come up, even when we're doing, the same work, or when we come together because we were brought together specifically to bring two different types of work together. So in a situation where I remember, all right, so my first company I had when I was in my 20s, early 20s, we sold my first company when I was 21, Phyllis. And I remember hiring people, and I didn't know how to do that. And I didn't know how to manage people, but I did the best that I could. And I remember recognizing early on that part of me had to know what was going on so people would recognize the authority that needed to be there, because I was the decision maker. Yet at the same point in time, I didn't have enough. And of course, this part's hindsight. And this part is also a little bit of vulnerability. Back then, I would have never told you I had no idea what I was doing. Back then, I would have never said, I can't, I actually need you to help me to get the information, because I thought I was supposed to have all the answers. And so, go ahead.
I was going to say, and when we think about ageism, it goes down too. The young people, that's where I came up with the word I made up, collaboragism, which is really getting all the generations together to confront ageism, because it can hit anybody at any time. And the older people get it more, but the younger people do. And the people, as I say, babies are getting older every day. So, you can be susceptible to this. It's bad. It's the stigmas, and we can only get rid of it if we work together on that.
Yeah. So, I'm 41 now, Phyllis, and I'm just now getting to the point where I don't think my age matters anymore.
I actually don't believe in chronological age. I don't think, except
Me
for
neither.
Medicare and Social Security, those kinds of things that you need to have it. You can throw out any number and you cannot describe what a typical person is of that particular age. So I don't think it matters. I think that you can judge people or hire people on that basis. And interesting, the other thing when you were talking about, I mean, that's really awesome that you had a company that you even got to the point of selling at age 21, and the things that you felt you wouldn't say that you thought were your weaknesses. We're talking about the dot-com era and all these young people who, unless they hired their parents, it was they didn't know about profits. They didn't know about all kinds of things. They had great ideas, and that was wonderful, and they were willing to work hard, but it did not work, and so the bust was very tough for them. And that was, a lot of the Xers who I think are being neglected too much. And I'm very concerned about working with them.
Depending on the charts that you use, and I am so glad to hear you say you don't believe in linear age, like the way that we experience time, because I'm the exact same way. There are days I'm like, okay. And then there are other days I'm like, oh, I don't know anything. What can I learn today? So that place of within myself. And I would challenge the audience to consider this. Are there days that you feel resigned? Are there days you feel done? Are there days you feel excited? Are there days that you feel like you can't wait to learn something new? And those are the types of questions that really just tap into our own personal awareness to allow us to say, okay, I'm closed or I'm open today. It could be that simple.
You wouldn't be human if you weren't feeling differently from time to time, or whatever was happening or what was on your mind. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons it's good the more we let people bring their whole selves to work and understand they didn't just show up there with nothing going on in their life, right? That's right. It could be anything.
That's exactly right.
If we let people and we reach out and say it's okay to talk to me about this, or I understand if you don't want to talk about it, but it just makes a kind of connection that I think we are losing too much of.
It makes me think of a situation, and I run into this, like you, I'm a consultant, Phyllis. And so there's a conversation I was having recently with a representative of a company, and they were talking about solving a problem in a very specific way. We have this problem, and it was regarding safety. We want to increase our safety. Well, to increase our safety, they decided we want to do this thing, which was create a safety course. And my first question to them after I listened to all of this, my first question was, I think a safety course is great. And then what else is the company going to do to support safety? What other resource is going to be available to make these people who and basically it was from distraction, being distracted, do they have a way to get themselves grounded? And will they be rewarded for being grounded and using a resource like that? Or is it going to be a resource that isn't going to, right? So now we're coming back to that business scenario about multi-generational things. We might also have other things like our socioeconomic status, our gender, or the culture that we come from, the way that we tend to interact with our families and our peers. All of that comes into play. And so just having an idea, having a problem and finding a solution, I guess where I'm going with this, is only the beginning. But it's what I hear you saying is we have to get into that fuzzy part, that gray area, because until we do, we don't know how much of it is gray and how much we can actually really benefit because it's colorful and filled with opportunity.
That's right. I mean, and when we see how people are thinking and sometimes resisting change, well, why is that? I mean, we have to try to figure out or find out in some way what are the fears. There's a lot of the, you had mentioned to me before we started, does all the tension among generations come from bias? Well, does it all come back? I think some of it does, but not absolutely everything. Obviously ageism, things do, the fear of what's unfamiliar, things like confirmation bias when you tend to relate to something that agrees with what you thought in the first place. But there are other kinds of things, and sometimes it's laziness of not taking the time to figure out what is behind the hype you're hearing. Not that you just hear people saying something that is negative about someone else or a group or something, and you don't think, well, what is that? Is there any truth to it? Why are they feeling that way? And each generation, to bring it back to that, has fears of different things. And if there are people who are fearful of someone taking their place, so they don't want to praise them because it might make somebody else look good. Well, it shouldn't. You shouldn't be working in that kind of culture. But we all know that a lot of them are like that. Yeah. And the compensation systems, another thing that's a great motivation or demotivation for things that we would like to see change. Mm-hmm. Because if there are disincentives, people aren't going to want to do it. Or if there's no, incentive rewards.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to a question from the audience. Catherine, using hashtag VBB Radio, is asking, how do we start building multi-generational teams?
Well, I think, first of all, you need to look at what is the problem that the team is there to solve. I've done a lot of work. I've been a marketing and business development consultant for a few decades. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of that is about attracting and retaining clients of different generations. It's not only the internal teams, but the internal teams have to relate well to them. So you're going to look and say, well, will they be more comfortable, or are they in an industry where people tend to be very young or older and have been around for a long time? Do we have people who can understand those similarities? What kinds of experiences and talents and skills do we need? And have a mix of all of those kinds of things. So it's not necessarily the person who brought in the business or who's the best at doing that, but you need a combination of all these various skills. And to think about that, not necessarily who have you been working with all along that you think you feel is familiar and you feel comfortable with. But that's important. And especially when we have to solve a problem really quickly, that's probably the best way to go. But if there's more time and you're thinking long term, and how do you want to have the organization you work with be really sustainable, should be a combination of different generations and other aspects of diversity. And what is the client mix look like, or the mix of the people that you'll be interacting with? Mm-hmm. So there are many things to consider. Putting together a team is a complex thing.
It is a complex thing. Yeah. And sometimes we think, oh, let's just put these people together. Well, yeah, sure. But there is a bigger model. There is a design behind it based off of what I heard you saying around what are we trying to accomplish? What do we want this team to be able to do? And who are the people with their experiences that can add some sort of value to be iterative or innovative along the way?
And it may not only be the people who are in the immediate team, but there tends to be so much siloing also.
Yes.
You know, the IT people are there with themselves, the marketing people, the, you know, operations of various things, product development. And building things in a siloed way is really not the most effective, efficient way to do things. So we got to break those down.
Yes, we do have to break those down. And we have a few more questions. So keep them coming in. Hashtag VBB Radio. Use radio at Red Direction. And we'll be right back.
You're listening to the voice of Bold Business Radio. In every program, we share stories, tips, and concepts that benefit short-term goals and increase confidence in long-term positioning. Stay current and receive programs to continue sparking ideas about growth strategy by subscribing to the program at voiceofboldbusiness.com. Now, back to Jess.
You're listening to program 237, Productivity of Multi-Generational Teams. And our very special guest is Phyllis Weiss Haserot, and she is the president and founder of Practice Development Counsel. Now, before we jump into a couple more questions from the audience, I have a question. How did you come up with your company name? Because they're incredibly good words put together, and they seem to embody what you are attempting to bring to the world and actually leaving behind and seeing success in organizations.
Well, it actually was probably more relevant for the business that I started with, which is marketing and business development, consulting, and all kinds of things around that. And I still do that. In about 2004, I got so excited and fascinated by all things generational at work that became a big part of the focus and grew. But first of all, I'll explain what Practice Development Counsel means. And we need to spell counsel because it's COUNSEL, which means advice. Very often people think counsel as in it's never been a nonprofit. But when I started this, and my clients have been primarily professional services in those days and for a long time. So I worked with a lot of law firms, accounting firms, consulting, all kinds of things like that. It's broader now because the generational issues tend to carry over to a lot of different industries. But a lot of people don't know that prior to a Supreme Court decision in 1977, Bates versus the state of Arizona, it was illegal, unprofessional, and unethical to do any marketing, business development, advertising. You couldn't get get yourself written up in a magazine. You couldn't call up anybody but a relative and say, let's go to lunch and see how I can help you. They had to approach you. And it took a long time for these people who said, I didn't go to school to learn how to sell and wanted to practice their profession to get used to that. It's still not so easy for some people, but there's certainly loads of it now that has exploded over the last couple of decades. And so practice development was like a euphemism for marketing or business development. Yeah. And so it was marketing advice that really means.
Thank you for sharing. That's really neat. And I knew when I saw how it was spelled, I know we're talking, so people can't see it written down, but counsel with the advice type of counsel. And so to practice. Right. And that's interesting. So, okay, so this might lead right into what our question from Josh. Josh used hashtag VBB Radio. He wishes to know which is more impactful, generational or cultural divides in the workforce?
That's hard to say, and it depends where and how much of a strong cultural upbringing individuals have had, what country they're in, where they're stronger than others. So I think that both of them are. We have so many things to be sensitive of it to. It's hard, it really is hard working with other people, and becomes more complex every day because things are so much more diverse. If we go back to the 1950s or even the 60s and some of the 70s, people were, the backgrounds were more the same. And if you look at the Gen Zers now, the youngest generation that's just entering, they are very diverse. Yes. And we're told that in not too many years from now, white males are going to be a minority in the US.
Right.
So there are a lot of changes that are going on. And again, we get to the whole thing about fears. People are afraid of what they may be losing. So it's, you've got to consider and try to think, well, what's behind why they are resisting change? Why are they resisting working with certain people?
So your comments about bias earlier and fear earlier, and you tied them right back in here. I'm making an assumption here and more like kind of fleshing out this concept of an idea. Each has a definition. Bias has a definition. Fear has a definition. And what I hear is that they're intertwined, and they're intertwined more than we realize. And sometimes our bias is learned because that was our model. Yet sometimes what I hear you saying is our bias comes from what we're afraid of, and it comes from an inner protection mechanism. Am I interpreting am I interpreting that next level down correctly?
Yeah, I think so. And it can be situational. Suddenly you see some kind of behavior or reactions from somebody who you never saw it from before. And It may be that the environment or the situation that they're put in is very different from what they had faced before. And they see changes at work happening that are bringing on a lot of uncertainty.
Oh man. Okay. I think uncertainty is our biggest issue in life, whether it's at home, whether it's at work, whether it's where do we want to go and what do we want to do? How do we stay, especially with change happening so fast. So we have change happening so fast, not only technologically, right, but also on all kinds of other fronts, Phyllis. And so that makes me think about what, Anna is talking about, and she actually asked a question early on when we were talking about trust, because Anna's question is, with the amount of distrust, how do you manage different generations in the workplace? Since we all have distrust or erosion of trust in different areas.
You have to establish a culture, whether it's within a team or better still, the whole organization, to not only be open to learning about other people, but taking time, encouraging, taking time to talk to other people and find out about them, or talk to the whole situation you're all in and reflect about it. And that is something I heard in one of the other episodes that I was listening to before of yours about this present retreat. Now, I think if I understand correctly, that's what an individual should do for a certain block of time every week. But I think, yes, I believe in that. We need to be reflecting, and we need to be reflecting in groups too, not just jumping from one thing to another. And I understand the time pressures. We're all under that. We're all, up at midnight doing our emails. At least speaking for myself, and a lot of other people. It's not that I don't answer them during the day, but you do want to keep on top of things and be responsive to people. But we have so much pressure. People who are paid by billing hours, and that's how they're judged, even more than the results that they're getting. Those things make it very difficult and not necessarily the most effective things or what your clients want, So we need this reflection time, and we need time to be encouraged by employers to take that time to get to know people. It's got to happen there. The earlier it happens, the better it is.
That makes me think about safety. When we feel safe where we're at, we're more open, we're willing to share more. Mm-hmm. We're willing to be a little more vulnerable, right? If I were to go back to my story, I didn't feel very safe in my situation, but I knew I had to figure out how to do it. And so if I had felt safe, or I had known how to do that, or I had somebody who was able to model that for me, how neat would that have been? So, hindsight being 2020, I really think about safety a lot and the responsibility of what that means, because you're right. In a present retreat, it is an individual. It's an individual reflection, but it's also the business reflection. It's the reflection of the part of the business that I am responsible for. Mm-hmm. What do I reflect on that? Am I showing up in a way that makes people feel safe and willing? And am I able to see where those obstacles are around it? And also where the opportunities are, because I'm stopping, because I'm doing that reflection. And then, yes, to be able to take it to a group, I love the way you added onto that. And I would say that "and" is amazing, because we do take it out into our organization. And we do, and I think that's where that safety piece comes in. If we're getting to know people, if we are taking the time to understand where they're at, and then we can recognize what the priorities in the business are with exactly who and what and where we have things happening in our organization. That becomes like the secret sauce, if you will, to be able to know I can leverage here and go fast, or we're going to go down this path and it's not going to go as fast. It's okay. It's still rewarding and rich.
Right. Now, when we talk about safety, or when, just in general in the world, we think about physical safety. We're talking here about psychological safety.
Yeah, we are. Thank you.
And that is such an important thing. I mean, you're hearing that phrase a lot recently. I don't think we used to talk in those terms, but I'm recalling a study. Google wanted to know how, what made for the most successful teams. Mm-hmm. And they studied everything, every kind of diversity you could think of, different situations. And they found none of them was the answer until they came across when people felt safe to express their opinions, and that in a team situation or a group situation, everybody needs to be encouraged or required to contribute their thoughts. And that was what made the teams more effective, more innovative, more productive. So that the thing about having the diversity in different ways, but the psychological safety to feel that they could and should speak out.
Okay, I'm going to just point this out because we have a lot of people who are being coached. I know I hear this all the time. I don't want to should all over myself. Well, guess what? We should on ourselves once in a while, because in my opinion, it goes back to that self-reflection piece. And if I don't know myself well enough, I really can't show up in a space that I am open enough to be willing to learn who you are, Phyllis. And so I should be recognizing, where do I hit the edges and start to react versus respond? I should take the time to say, hey, who is this Phyllis person who's got this amazing book and has great experience working with organizations, and what can I learn from her? Those types of should questions are very different than the blaming kind. And so when we're talking about psychological safety and then using the word should, I'm like, well, let's just add this on. There is a place for could and should. It's our potential.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I love about the younger generations is they do speak up more, and they don't care as much about hierarchy and waiting their turn. It's got to be done respectfully, definitely, and courteously, not what it is, but to speak up and to put pressure as much as they can on the senior decision makers to give them the opportunity to speak up. And even if it's a matter of having a team leader or a practice leader or whatever, calling a meeting every couple of weeks where people can get there and, together and talk about what's on their mind or view or voice their opinion on something that's going on. I mean, people of all generations, really want to have some influence and a voice in decisions that are made that are affecting them.
Yes.
And that's a should.
And that is a should. And that's so important. And I know that this is something that has changed even from my parents to my generation in the workplace of it used to be, we go to work, we do what they say, we figure out how to show up, we deliver good work, and that's that, right? That's that. And I hear what you're saying because I was raised in that vein, but I didn't really follow that. I was a little bit more rebellious. No, I guess really I was a lot more rebellious. I was a lot more independent. Right. And you're absolutely right. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about the reasoning behind this. Let me understand, because it's when I can fully understand, which by the way, so when somebody does this to me, I totally, maybe not at first, but I get to the point where I recognize they want to bring their whole self. And to be able to bring their whole self, there's a questioning process involved. And to welcome that with open arms is the best thing that a leader or anybody in a leadership position in an organization can do. Recognize, and if we don't know, assume. This is coming from a place of, here's how this person wants to show up even more. They are willing to talk to me and ask more questions. Tactfully or not, that can be learned, right?
Yeah. Right.
But there's the dialogue. And I think that's what I hear you saying is the importance of the dialogue.
Absolutely.
Huh.
And exciting. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that people of all ages really want to grow and learn and need some things are harder for some people, and it might be because of their age, but it might not be. Just we all have certain talents and skills that are easier to learn. But if you feel vulnerable, or if you can let yourself be vulnerable enough to ask for the help. And, this one thing about what I believe in mutual mentoring or mentoring circles, but having people exchange whatever it is you're good at and being able to just feel comfortable asking. And I think it's very hard. Most leaders were not, at least as they moved up, and the models that they had, not encouraged or at least felt comfortable to be vulnerable and to admit that they can't do it all themselves and they don't have the answer to everything. And it's very hard for a lot of professionals because they thought, oh, I'm educated to be the expert and I got to find it all out for myself. And rather than admitting, I don't know all of this, and I'll either call upon someone else or take a little while to get the answer for you. But you mentioned early on that, when you were talking about you when you were 21, how difficult it was to appear vulnerable and not the genius leader that you think people are expecting.
Right.
But I think we're getting more open to that. We don't like command and control. We don't expect that people that we look up to as leaders all be this great authority figure, that we believe much more in collaboration and calling on various people, and that the world has gotten too complex to be able to do everything yourself.
And I think that's such a key piece. The world is too complex to do things by ourselves. And more, especially in a world where I was raised to be incredibly independent. I was raised that I can do it all, whatever all is for me. And to even recognize, sure, I could, but it's no fun and it's harder and it's draining. And so being able to embrace that and being able to relish, like my business coach, her name is Judith. She is older than I am, and she brings with her this wealth of knowledge. And I have to tell you, there are days that when we're working together, I'm like, I'm so glad I was willing to ask for help and have somebody, this extra set of eyes to just listen and talk and help me question and elicit what's going on inside so that I can show up the most and the most positive and the most completely for the team that I lead, so that I can be engaged with them instead of being engaged with myself.
Yeah. But it's also important to have a balance.
Yeah.
I mean, independence is good.
Yeah.
I believe in self-sufficiency. I brought up a self-sufficient child. I like to see that. So we don't want to have groupthink all the time.
Truth.
And every time you're asked to do something, to send out emails or on Slack or whatever it is you use to everybody to get their opinion and advice on something. Sometimes that's useful, but crowdsourcing isn't the only way, and you need to be resourceful yourself as well. So
I hear you saying that. That's right.
A mix, and most people want some autonomy. It's a very important thing to
and to find that balance is very hard. I'm either, are we too independent and a little bit hard-headed, even though we're self-sufficient, or can we really own our strength of, I know exactly where I'm self-sufficient and I can do what needs to be done, and think about how much more I can do and what that could be amplified when I have somebody else working with me that is also self-sufficient and is willing. So that's what I hear you saying. Use some amplification, not replacement of skills.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So we have a question from Pam, #VBB Radio. Is there a way to coach people to notice, recognize, and minimize generational bias?
Yeah, I think, as a person who has done a fair amount of coaching myself, what coaches do is ask questions, and they ask the why, and they get a response, and they ask the why about that response, and on, to make you really think through. And so we need to really question why we're thinking the way we are, or what we might know about someone, or what we might want to know about them, and why and how that's going to make a difference. Hoping that's so. I love the fact that you have so many questions.
Isn't this great?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Now, I want to know from you, what makes it bold to consider increasing our productivity by integrating, cultivating, and relying on multi-generational teams?
Well, I think that a lot of it is going out of one's comfort zone, and many times combating the divisiveness that I was talking about, to really exercise your curiosity muscle. People don't always do that or think about it, but if you want to be a good business developer, if you want to stay relevant, you need to, for networking and business development, to be a person who's curious about other people, ask them questions, getting to know them, and be, doing your own research in other ways. And I think this using different perspectives really is a good and bold way to achieve more innovation. And here we talked about providing psychological safety. That's another thing. Again, it's something that you have to think about. Is this a change in the culture we have, or the way that my team operates, that's really going to make a significant difference? And it also provides a way to create new structures that better suit the times and the generations. And things that worked really well before might not be exactly what we need now, which is not to say we should throw it all out. Again, you think it through. Are there ways to combine things, or to get people to understand why they should be different and what needs to be done to achieve those differences that are going to make you stronger as an individual, stronger as a team, stronger as an organization, and sustainable for the long term.
Do you see this box? Yeah. We unwrapped, we took the bow off, and look what came out. This amazing conversation that hit on culture, independence, trust, GENgagement is all wrapped up in this, the theme all the way through, for diversity and sustainability. And not only personal awareness, also team awareness. You're going to find all the program notes later today at voiceofboldbusiness.com/P237. That's voiceofboldbusiness.com/P for program 237. Wow. You may also search the site for productivity of multi-generational teams. Now, you've been joining in this conversation. Keep it going. First of all, you've listened and watched this far. Give us a rating. Tell us what you liked. Tell us your story. Tell us what you're experiencing and how you are using multi-generational teams, and how you can now use even more the knowledge and experience that surrounds you from the different life experiences of the teams that you have right now. Because in the end, it's your practical experience, my practical experience, Phyllis's practical experience, and the sharing of that allows us to learn and try things on and understand in a format that allows us to share and grow together. That's you defining what it means to be an effective leader today. And so we want to leave you with this question. How will your company benefit from increasing the productivity of multi-generational teams?
The Voice of Bold Business Radio gives you insights about how to achieve your company's growth strategy. Use hashtag BBBRadio or email us at radio@reddirection.com to ask questions and share your experiences. Add your voice to the conversation. Together, we define what being an effective leader means today. Special thanks to the Scott Treatment for technical production. Thank you for joining us.